Hello, dear friends of the viola community. Welcome to our shop. My name is Roberto Jardón Rico. I am a violin maker and restorer from Asturias. The city is Avilés in the north coast of Spain. Today we are going to give a small presentation about the effects of humidity changes on the viola. So we are going to talk about different aspects of the influence of humidity on the viola, and by extension on other bowed instruments. We will show that wood is a hygroscopic material sensitive to moisture, and we will give some practical advice regarding tuning, neck projection and string clearance. A procedure to identify an optimum humidity range for our instrument and how to keep it controlled and safe will be discussed among other useful topics. To understand why and how humidity has a deep influence in our instruments, in their performance and their integrity, we have to explain what hygroscopic materials are. The viola and the rest of the bowed instruments are made of wood, glue and varnish. The top is commonly made of spruce, and the rest, the back, sides, neck and scroll, are usually made of maple. Black parts like the fingerboard and the tailpiece are made of ebony, and the interior parts like the ribs and blocks of spruce or other soft wood like willow. Wood is a hygroscopic material because it absorbs water in the form of vapor from the surrounding air, and it also loses it trying to be at exactly the same level as the environment. When we talk about musical instruments, we understand that they are built with seasoned wood that has dried naturally for a number of years. So the cavities of the trachate cells that are like longitudinal tiny tubes of rectangular section are empty of water. When the wood is not dry, the water in the cavities of the cells is known as free water. What concerns us, as the wood in the instruments is dry, is what we call bound water, and it is associated with one of the main substances in the wood. There are three main chemical components of wood: cellulose, lignin and hemicellulose. Cellulose is very stable, not hygroscopic, and represents around 50% of the wood. Lignin is also stable and works like a glue that bonds the fibers and represents another 20% of the mass. What really should concern us is the other component, hemicellulose, which represents the other 25%. Hemicellulose is very hygroscopic and retains bound water instead of free water. We find it in the layers of the cell walls, and it works like a sponge that gets bigger when it absorbs water. This is the principal mechanism of wood dimensional change. A hygroscopic material expands when it absorbs water from the atmosphere and shrinks when it dehydrates. This is a major problem in the use of wood in musical instruments. Dimensional changes are different in the three axes of a piece of wood. Longitudinally or axially, the percentage of expansion is 0.4%, almost nothing. Radially, the expansion and contraction can reach 4%. Tangential change is double, 8%. Wood density has a role in this story too. Density is proportional to dimensional variation. Spruce for the top is a light kind of wood that averages 38% density, while maple averages 60%, so we can expect the back of the instruments to have a lot more swelling and shrinkage than the top. This difference creates distortions and internal tension in areas of the instrument every time it is adjusting to the moisture content of the atmosphere. This kind of variation is always happening unless the instrument is kept in a completely controlled environment, like in a museum. In real life, our instruments experience these changes all the time. There is a seasonal pattern for each territory. For example, in many places of the northern hemisphere, summer has higher levels of humidity than winter because wet soil and more intense sun radiation produce more evaporation. Some places have small seasonal humidity variations, and this is very lucky, while other places have extreme changes, like for example the east coast of USA and Canada, very humid summer and very dry winter caused by the cold Labrador current. Indoor and outdoor values are different too. Hot air can contain more water than cold air. Relative humidity is a rather difficult concept. It is the ratio of the real moisture in the air, also called absolute humidity, to the maximum amount of moisture the air can hold at the same temperature. This means that a given absolute humidity represents different values of relative humidity at different temperatures. In cold air, it will have a high value, and in the hot air, a lower value. Relative humidity is what really affects our instruments, and it is what we need to pay attention to. Let's talk now about how humidity variations make tuning problematic through some periods of the year. Pegs are just conical pieces of wood with a small handle that fit inside conical holes in the peg box. How precisely they fit together determines how well the system works. But it is a very primitive and even problematic system that brings a lot of frustration to musicians. As we explained before, wood, being a hygroscopic material, absorbs water from the air and releases it, trying to reach an equilibrium with the environmental humidity. When the moisture is high, the pegs will swell and the peg box holes will shrink, resulting a big increase in friction. In practice, this means that with high humidity, we will need much more effort to move the pegs. They will often move in leaps, producing an unpleasant tack-tack noise, and tuning will become very difficult as the frequency jumps back and forth, not falling in the right place. In a very extreme scenario, the pegs can get stuck. What happens when the instrument dehydrates? The pegs will shrink while the peg box holes will become larger, to a point where the string tension can be bigger than the friction, allowing the string to get loose. When we open our case and we find one or more loose strings, we should become aware that the instrument is losing water, and this dehydration can be dangerous, even causing cracks. We can't expect this primitive system of tuning to work well all through the year. It's not realistic. If the place where we live has huge humidity differences along the seasons, then we will see that the pegs will behave following this pattern. We will need to intervene, and the traditional way is modifying the friction of the pegs. How can we do this? When the friction is too big because of high humidity, we will use a lubricant substance. Traditionally, simple dry soap works fine. We will extract the peg from the peg box and rub a small amount of soap in the shiny bands where it is in contact with the peg box. Give a few turns without the string to check that it moves fluidly, and then put the string back. When the friction is too low, on the other hand, because the instrument is dehydrated, we can increase it by using chalk the same way as the soap. Just a little amount on these shiny areas. Sometimes we will use both soap and chalk in different proportions, always checking how the peg moves. This is the advantage of having two substances with opposite effects. We can either use only one of them or both with different quantities. Commercial products for this purpose are usually mixtures of a lubricant and a mineral substance, but you can't alter the proportion, so it is more limited, especially in extreme situations. Graphite, although it has become popular for this use, is, in our opinion, never advisable. It gives the illusion that it works, but after a short time we notice that it doesn't. It's too thin for the wood pores. Another very noticeable effect of humidity on the instrument is the variation in the neck and fingerboard projection angle. As we said before, musicians often verbalize concern about temperature, hot or cold weather, referring to possible issues with their instruments. But these issues, as we explained, are mostly determined by humidity and not heat. And this is a very clear example with a lot of impact. Let's talk about it. When air moisture is high, the fingerboard will drop sensibly, increasing the distance to the strings and making us work harder to press them against it. If this effect is very big and the strings are too far from the fingerboard, it will affect deeply the way we play, slowing the movement of the fingers and causing unnecessary tension in the wrist, also affecting vibrato technique. Some musicians take their violas to the shops at this time to reduce the height of the bridge. But this is not the right time of the year to do it, and we will explain why later. Now, when the instrument is dehydrated, usually in the winter with the added effect of heating, the fingerboard will rise, coming closer to the strings and making our life easier regarding left hand. If this dehydration is too extreme, the fingerboard can approach the strings too much, and this can start to produce residual noises. In cellos, where these movements are greater, in some extreme cases it forces the players to have two bridges to be able to play comfortably through the seasons. This is common, especially on the east coast of the USA and Canada. If we think about it, the fingerboard goes up and down like the pen that draws the curves in the paper cylinder of a museum hygrometer, always following the moisture content. So if we are thinking about reducing the height of the bridge to make the strings softer and easier to press, we should do it in the winter, when we know that the fingerboard projection is at its highest point. If we do it in the summer, it can happen that when the fingerboard goes up, the strings might be too close and produce noise, and this would force us to order a new bridge. Of course, we can keep the first one and use it when the humidity is high again and the strings are too far from the fingerboard. This pattern repeats incessantly. These very noticeable movements of the neck and fingerboard projection are produced by the expansion and contraction of the top and the back of the viola, trying to accommodate to humidity levels. And this brings further problems that will impact both playability, as we have seen, and also sound. What can we say about this? Again, the behavior of the instrument follows a pattern and it is completely predictable. For example, when the viola is exposed to a high level of humidity, the distance between the top and the back will increase, making the sound post a little loose. When we play it, we notice that the response is slow, always a little late, and the sound becomes rubbery. The water in the wood increases the weight of the top and the back, and also makes the wood softer, so the instrument loses some of its brightness, some proportion of high harmonics. It can actually get really dull if the moisture is very high. The other extreme situation is that of high dehydration. The top and the back come closer to each other, making the sound post tighter. Less water also means less weight, and the wood is also stiffer, so the response of the instrument is faster but unforgiving. We need to pay more attention to the bow because we can easily produce residual noises in the attack. We can't play comfortably so close to the bridge. Usually, the sound output is bigger, but to some extent this depends on how the instrument is built. Some violas will only work well in either high or low humidity environments, and will suffer in the others. There will always be an optimal level regarding sound and performance. It is of great importance to the players to be conscious of the regime changes in the behavior of their instruments. We find that often they blame themselves or feel that they are not at their best when these are objective problems of the instruments that have always happened and that follow a very clear pattern that will repeat again and again. This makes monitoring humidity levels a very profitable practice for the viola players, as they start becoming aware of how the instrument works through the year and what to expect from it in each period. As we said before, the sound performance of an instrument is deeply influenced by the humidity level of the surrounding air, and this makes us think that for each instrument there will be an optimal range of moisture content in which it will offer best results. We all perceive that there are periods when the instrument is more responsive and more pleasant to play. We need to be able to identify this range, and for this purpose we use a hygrometer, a device that measures relative humidity in the air. They are easy to find and cheap. Sometimes the cases have analogic hygrometers that give fairly reliable measurements, but not good absolute values. For example, if we see that the hand indicates a drop from 70% to 50%, we can trust that the relative humidity has gone down 20%, but we can't be so sure about the 70 and the 50 figures. They usually need to be set, moving the hand to maximum humidity when we saturate the device with moisture. Digital hygrometers are probably the best choice. If we put a number of them together and compare their readings, we will see that there are discrepancies, but not so big. For our purpose of identifying when our instrument sounds best and when it might be at risk, they are okay. We should take a digital hygrometer to the room where we study and start monitoring humidity and trying to correlate it to our subjective impression of how the instrument works. We can even take down notes on a calendar, following the curve imposed by the seasons. Soon we will experience that when the humidity drops from a certain point, the instrument will start to sound harsh, to be sort of irritable, and as we explained before. On the other hand, when the humidity goes up, there will be a level from which the viola starts to sound dull, slow, irresponsive. All instruments are slightly different and have different allowance for moisture and dryness. It is common to see that a viola works best from 45 to 55%, and out of this range, the performance gets worse the more we depart from it. Another viola can have this range from 35% to 45%, or from 50 to 60, but we need to identify our target range. When we have finally found it, we will always be conscious of what is going on with the instrument and what we can expect from it regarding humidity. This knowledge can help us in other ways. It can be useful to find the best rooms in the house to keep the instrument, as storage is also important. It can help us to identify potentially dangerous places for the integrity of the instrument. Apart from natural humidity variations due to weather changes and the seasons, it is very important to be aware of the influence of the artificial environments such as heating and air conditioning. In winter, the cold air, as we said earlier, cannot hold so much moisture. Below 0 Celsius, the water vapor is very low, giving a relative humidity of around 17%. This is almost like desert. Inside the houses, we use heating devices that also dry the air. This becomes an extreme environment that is very dangerous. Often, old cracks open and new cracks appear on the tables of the instruments. Buildings with central heating are especially dry environments, very dangerous because even if we choose to turn it off in our flat, the rest of the neighbors will use it and the whole building will be very dry. It is a paradox, but auditoriums are also dangerous places. Heating will be strong in the winter, and in the summer air conditioning, which is a strong source of dehydration, as the procedure to lower the temperature implies getting rid of water. A huge closed and insulated space like an auditorium with heating and air conditioning systems is very difficult to keep with good moisture levels. Once we know how to monitor moisture content and correlate it with the behavior of the instrument, we can also prevent scenarios of extreme levels that can put in danger the integrity of the viola. A device that will help us do this is the humidifier, commonly called dampit. The concept is very simple: a rubber tube with small holes that contains a very hygroscopic tissue similar to the floor mop fibers. When do we use it? Only when we expect a rapid dehydration, for example, when we travel from a humid place to a dry place. The idea is that the instrument, as we know, will always tend to accommodate to the surrounding level, and if it dehydrates fast, it will shrink. If it shrinks too much, new cracks can occur, or old cracks can open. Dehydration is faster than moisturizing, so the humidifier can help to make dehydration slower, not to prevent it completely. If we plan to stay for a long time in a dry place, we can use the humidifier at the beginning of the trip and use it for a few days until the instrument gets used to the new drier level. Given enough time, the dimensional changes will happen without risk. Only rapid shrinkage can cause real damage. Long airplane flights are dangerous too because the air in the cabin has to be dehydrated to be pressurized. What is the right procedure to use the dampit or humidifier? We just need to immerse it in water, then take it out, twist it to remove excess, and dry the surface with a paper tissue. Then we introduce it inside the instrument through the lower orifice of the left sound hole. Be careful when you extract it, pulling gently and occasionally rotating the tube so that it doesn't damage the lower wing of the sound hole. We have to check periodically the content of water in the humidifier, and to do so we press it with our fingers, looking for evidence of water inside the small holes. If we forget to renovate the water in the period that we intend to use the humidifier, it will do nothing. We also need to know that the humidifier does not remove water from the instrument when it is dry. It wouldn't work like that in a damp environment. It is just a humidifier as long as we keep it wet, not a dehumidifier. The internal humidifier can eliminate the risk of rapid dehydration and the occurrence of cracks, but eventually the viola needs to be in equilibrium on its own in any climate. Regarding storage, the hygrometer gives us valuable information about which rooms in the house are more appropriate to keep the instrument, even if we study in a different room. In wet places, the south rooms are drier. If our house is very dry, then maybe the north rooms are better. It all depends on the optimal range that we have been able to establish for our viola previously. How much can we trust cases as humidity-insulated containers? Not very much, really. They are not hermetical, so after 3/4 of an hour to an hour, the humidity level inside the case will be the same as outside. If we travel from a dry place to a humid one, the instrument is not at risk unless it is extremely humid. However, the risk is much smaller. Maybe glue joints come apart, but no cracks. The biggest danger is dehydration in a very short period of time. A common place where cracks appear on the top when it shrinks rapidly is on both ends of the lower saddle. How does this happen? The top contracts a lot, becoming narrower, but the saddle doesn't because ebony is more stable and because its fibers are longitudinal to its length, and it doesn't allow the top to contract more. As the top shrinks and gets narrower, the saddle produces the cracks. Very high humidity levels affect the glue joints. The reason is that the glue that violin makers use is mainly collagen, which is again a very hygroscopic material. The most common type is hide glue, but also bone and fish glue are in use. Hide glue is an animal glue extracted from hide tissue. It is presented in granules or flakes that are first mixed with water and then heated in a double boiler up to a temperature of around 60 degrees Celsius, where it reaches the maximum strength. Why is collagen glue important to bow musicians? The answer is simple. It is a reversible glue. Surfaces glued with this kind of adhesive can come apart when needed without breaking the wood. So, in a way, all the instruments wouldn't have survived so long if they had been assembled with a different kind of glue. Heat and moisture release hide glue molecules and allow us to open joints. It is also a very strong glue. If we think about the tiny surface of the central joint of a top, it is amazing that this glue keeps both sides bound together for even centuries in a solid way. The same about the joints of the sides and ribs with the top or back. But what is indeed a virtue, at the same time becomes a weakness. Every now and again, joints are loosened. Where does this happen? Mainly at the same places, following a pattern well known by restorers, in the upper right shoulder and in the left lower bout, close to the chin rest, the areas where the surface of the viola is in contact with your hand and neck. In this case, it is the humidity and warmth of our skin and sweat that weaken the joint, mostly during humid and hot times of the year. If the air moisture is very high, the fingerboard, the neck, or other glue joints may open too. Although it seems scary, it is not as dangerous as cracks, and it is the price we have to pay to take advantage of using this amazing glue. That would be all for now. Thanks for your attention, and I hope you found this useful to preserve and enjoy this amazing instrument.